It's me. I've just mentioned what we do briefly. We're based at the Engine House in Bexley. We are a business support and fundraising organisation. We've written a lot of funding bids over the years. There's a number of us work both here and off-site, and we have raised over £30 million for the organisations that we've been contracted with to write funding applications. So there's more of my contact details, and I'll put them in the chat as well. What are we going to cover today? We're going to cover finding the right funding, submitting a quality application, equalities, social impact, and other related issues, and then some information about bid writing. So here are my 5 top tips for bid writing. The first is to decide the direction of your project or organisation and look for funding to support it, not vice versa. Don't look for money or look at money influencing the direction of your organisation. There's no point in just chasing money because it does lead you into some contradictory and organizational problems if you do that. My second tip is to research the funders, because there's 2 elements to this, basically: where the money is, and the second one is how to actually write an application. But you can be the best bid writer in the world, if you don't know where the money is, then you're not going to be able to find the right funder to submit it to. So we're covering both of these in this. The third tip is develop a project plan or outline for your application. My fourth tip is to develop a model application, a kind of core application with key sections in it, and then you can use that as a building block for other applications. These days, many applications are either applications that are emailed to you or online applications through various websites. There are other ways of submitting applications, but those are the 2 main ones, basically. Finally, be persistent. Bid writing takes time. You're not going to succeed all the time, so you have to be realistic about it, and don't be a quitter. Just keep going. Types of funding. We're going to look at these first. The other thing I should say is completely untutored and unsupported, your chances of submitting a successful application are about 5%. So that's, completely unsupported, unskilled, and possibly trying it for the first time or the first few times. That's the success rate. So even with that, even without any skills or knowledge, there's still a chance. But of course, we're here today to give you some of that knowledge and skills. What you're going to get today is essentially an overview. So we'll start with the types of funding for for this presentation. I've combined them into 6 areas. There are other areas as well, but these are the principal ones. Number 1 is grant making, trusts and foundations, charitable trusts, of which there are a lot. And then more on that later. Then you've got statutory funding, local government, national government, European and national funding. And then you've got community fundraising of various types, things like crowdfunding, for example. Then you've got the lottery funds, the National Lottery, which ranges from the smallest one, awards for all, right through to the biggest fund, which is called Reaching Communities. And finally, you've got what's called social investment. I would, in a nutshell, what that is either grant or loan funding with strings attached. It could be social outcomes, it could be community outcomes, it could be financial outcomes. So again, we'll try and look at a few of these as we go on. I should also mention we've got a YouTube channel that has got many videos. We've got about 20 videos on there that cover various aspects of funding. And again, I'll put those details in the chat in a while. So types of funding, what do you know about these? We'll start off with charitable trusts, grant-making trusts and foundation. They originally were set up to distribute funds to community or good causes, as they see it. There's a significant number of trusts in the UK. There's over 100,000 large and small that are mapped. There's probably a lot more that, especially small ones, that aren't mapped at all for various reasons. The basic criteria is that must be charitable activity and within the criteria in their trust deed. So what that means is it's going to have a charitable purpose, and it depends on the focus of the funder. So if it's young people, they will obviously look at making grants for projects to support young people, if the same for older people, and indeed any other sectors. And these vary from very small grants to 500k plus. The biggest funder in the UK, the Wellcome Foundation, gives out grants of up to £3 million for some projects, and possibly more for some discretionary projects. Assessment times can often take quite a while, from 3 months to a year. The bigger ones try to do it quicker, but some smaller ones can take up to a year to make a decision. So if you submit an application to a charitable trust and don't get a response immediately, don't assume that it's not being considered. These things take time, and sometimes they have to be authorised by the full board of the charity, which may only meet quarterly, every 6 months, or in some cases every year. So that's why it takes time. Generally they like projects which make money go further by levering in other funds. So many charitable trusts say that they don't want to be your principal funder, but they might fund 50% of your activities, or 10%, whatever the percentage is. Sometimes it's more than that, 70, 80, 90%. Larger trusts may be prepared to take risks and support hard to fund projects. So here's a couple of links you might want to have a look at. One is a more general site called My Funding Central. If you're a non-profit or a small business or sole trader, you might be able to register for free with that, because there's a self-declaration on it. If you're a larger organization, there's a paywall. Another fund there which supports women-led projects and businesses is the Global Fund for Women, which is an American-based site. But again, it's a very well-funded site, but they do change their priorities on a regular basis. So do check that out before you apply and look at the terms and conditions. Who are the biggest charitable trust funders, and how much do you think individual charities give out per year in grants? There is what they call a top 500 charities, which is monitored by an organisation called the Directory for Social Change. They are researching this on a regular basis. The amount of money every year distributed by charitable trusts is around about £5 billion. That consists of the top 500 and a number of other organisations which are tracked and monitored. Britain's biggest charitable trust funder is the Wellcome Trust, which is the charitable arm of the Wellcome Drug Company. And they give out, and this is just one charitable trust, £770 million a year, mainly for health-related research and support. but there are many, many others that give out, distribute funding large and small. The second group of funders are statutory funders. These include local, central, and regional government. So in London, it will be the Greater London Authority, your local authority, and the national government, and other bodies like relevant health authorities and previously European funds. There still are some European funds, even though we've left the European Union. I think most of those are going to finish within the next couple of years, unless we renegotiate the terms, because Switzerland and Norway, who are not in the European Union, have negotiated special deals so that they can access European funding. So that might come back at some stage, but at the moment, most relevant European funds will finish in the next couple of years. What the grants given out by central and local government are usually to further their objectives. Like with your local authority, it could be because they've got a responsibility to promote well-being within the community, for example. So it could be around that, but there are many other priorities that local authorities and central and regional government have got. But all the funding focuses on those particular objectives, whatever they are. These are usually, there are some small grant programs, but they're usually larger and longer grants than trusts are more likely to fund core costs, so that the running costs of your organizations, because most charitable trust funders prefer these days to fund projects rather than the day-to-day running costs of your project. But some do, and you can get some of them part funded through grants, depending on what you're delivering. They tend to be more bureaucratic and inflexible, and the application process may be complicated and drawn out with more than one stage. A lot of the bigger ones now have two-stage applications, and there will also be guidelines and support for applicants, so there'll be information. And these days they tend to have, for the bigger funds, online forums till the application date closes. So that's central and local government funds. There have been a lot of these for businesses and other organisations recently through the so-called additional restrictions grants, but many of them are now coming an end. So you'll need to look at other sources. We're going to mention a few soon. How do you find out about these? There's three good links. I've already mentioned myfundingcentral.co.uk. Another very good one is grantsonline.org.uk. Again, this has a paywall, but you can get the grant information from the actual site, and then I'll save you £150 here. All you need to do is get the name of the funder and then Google it. If you have a paywall like we do, you can click right through direct to the funder, but if you're not on a paywall, then you can't do that. The other good source is the government's website, gov.uk, which has a lot of very good funding sources, particularly for businesses. So I'd advise you to go onto that site and search business support, and you will find a lot of links. That's the government's national website. The next set of funders are the lottery funds. So you've got a wide range of these, ranging from Awards for All, which is the smallest strand of the lottery, and a range of others, including the Heritage Lottery Fund, the Arts Council Lottery Fund, Sport England Lottery Fund, and a whole range of others. There's probably about 20 different lottery funds at any one time. If you're an arts, heritage, or sports project, you have to go on to, well, in the case of arts, the Arts Council. If you're a heritage or cultural project, the Heritage Lottery Fund's website, and if you're a sports project, Sport England, the website, and they all have other funding opportunities as well. Again, there's a website of the lottery, the main website of the lottery. They've got links to many of the other programs that I've just mentioned. The next group is corporate or company funding. They are often these days only small amounts or one-off grants. Many companies give to well-known charities. Where big corporates tend to get involved these days, it's usually in terms of support using their expertise. So it could be mentoring and coaching. It could be free legal advice. It could be secondhand furniture, free use of premises or rooms. It's often done under the banner of corporate social responsibility. Again, you need to research this carefully if you're going to bid to them. Where can you get into information on this? There's 3 sites there. The Entrepreneur's Handbook, which is a very good source of information and has a lot of grant funding information as well. It's got 60 pages of it. The Stable Company is another one. And the final one is Business in the Community, which is an organization that supports links between businesses and charities and non-profits. So it's very useful to get information for your project, whatever it is, through that. The next section is crowdfunding. There's a link there. The biggest site in the UK is crowdfunder.co.uk. Crowdfunding operates in 3 ways. There are some that where the work is done entirely by a loan funder. For example, there are platforms like Funding Central and others. What they will do is they will you apply to them for a loan essentially, and then you have your details circulated to a panel of lenders that they've got. Some are individuals and some are corporates, and the idea is from this bank of lenders they get you the best loan deal. For the non-profit sector, if you go on crowdfunder.co.uk, this is explained in detail. If you're a private company, you will pay approximately 5% of what you raise. You don't have to register in advance. You have to register in advance rather, but you don't have to pay anything up front. They collect the money and they will deduct their fee from that. If you're a non-profit, then they waive the charge. But if you're a business, they will charge you 5% of what you raise. So if you raise 5,000, you would get 5,000 minus their 5% fee and some other transaction fees. The other form of crowdfunding is what I will call Dragon's Den type investment. That site there, Crowdcube, they said they've raised over £600 million for businesses from investors. They have a panel of investors. If they like your project idea, which you put on the site, then they can buy a share of your business. The idea is if it succeeds, then they've got some value in the business. If it doesn't succeed, then their investment is at risk. So it can go from small amounts of money, £100 or whatever, to much larger amounts. So there is a range of different types of platforms. There's some other ones there that I've mentioned. Well worth checking those out. Here's a few other sources of information. That's a very good site, the gov.uk Business Finance Support and Business Hub London. And there's a number of other sites there that you can get information about funding and other related support. Well worth checking those out. Here are some specific sources of capital funding. That's funding for buildings, premises, and larger items of equipment like vehicles or some computer hardware, large photocopies, etc., etc. The National Lottery Community Fund, big lottery, has a strand of capital funding mainly around buildings and premises, and you can bid for up to 500,000. There's another charitable organisation called Garfield Weston Foundation where they have unlimited grants, and there's a few others there like the Henry Smith charity and the Bernard Sunley charity that will consider premises related support and funding. But this is much harder to get than project or running costs, because probably about 10% of funders do capital funding. But most of the others will do revenue funding. That's funding for projects and various running costs. Here are a number of sources of funding for revenue funding. That's, I've just mentioned that, that's running costs, project management costs, and costs for specific projects. So Awards for All, which is part of the lottery. The Paul Hamlin Foundation, which funds a lot of creative industries related projects. The Santander Foundation that funds a number of different types of project. The Henry Smith charity, Wellcome Trust, which will fund if you're a health organisation or business or an individual. They've got a whole range of support there. Another one I'd highlight is Innovate UK, which provides support for digital businesses and projects. So there are a wide range of these. That's just a cross section I've put on one slide. So we're going to go into the next part of it now, which is I'll give you some information about how to access funding. And if you look at our YouTube channel, there's a whole lot of other videos and information on sources of funding. But now we're going to look at the bid writing part of it. So remember first, the gap between success and failure in this area is very slight. It's a bit like horse racing or athletics. You know, the gap between success and failure is very, very small. So detail is important. That's the first point to make. Get someone to proofread your work. That's what we tend to do here. We tend to give it to one of our colleagues, and the colleague will usually not know what the bid is about. If they read it and they understand it, then we've done our job, because keeping it clear, concise, and simple is one of the best tips I can give you. Because remember, somebody will read this at the other end. They may have hundreds of applications to read. So the less complex it is, the more understandable it is, the better it is. If they understand it, you're on the right track. Many bids fail for two reasons, and people are often surprised by this. The two main reasons that many bids fail, not all bids, but many bids fail, is because they aren't submitted on time and they are not signed. These days it's usually an electronic signature. I mean, obviously if you submit it late, it's not going to get considered. Why electronic signatures? Because on many bids, the lottery is another example of that, because effectively you're signing a contract with them, and if you don't sign that contract, the bid is deemed not to be valid. So if you do both of those things, your chances of succeeding have improved by about 15% before it's even been read. So you'd be surprised on how many bids don't do that. The next thing you need to look at in terms of developing your bid is the project proposal itself. And you need to break this down into bite-sized chunks. The areas you need to look at is, what does your project wish to achieve? So, what's it going to deliver? Who the beneficiaries will be? Who is going to benefit from this? Who are the people that are going to benefit from this? Whoever they are, younger people, older people, or you could be providing a service. If you're a business, you could be providing a service to a section of the community or a specific geographic area. What services will you offer? What area will you work in? The next thing you need to focus on is the activities that are the focus of the application. So break this down into the individual steps required to achieve your objectives. In this case, this is a training company. I've taken this from a training company bid. 5 12-week courses, each comprising 1 hour of individual guided learning lessons, 4 one-hour group sessions, 4 one-hour tutorials, and 4 to 6 hours of open learning with access to IT facilities. So that's kind of breaking it down, what you're going to deliver directly, and then what other facilities, in this case open learning facilities, are going to be accessible to the people who you're aiming, or the organizations you're aiming this at. You need to look at your resources. These are broken down into several categories, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this is some of them. So there's your staffing and your staffing resources, premises, obviously. If you're a non-profit, you might have volunteers. If you're a business, you might have interns or people on apprenticeships or the Kickstarter scheme. Next is materials and whatever resources you provide as part of the project. Administrative support, of course, is important as part of any project. So those are some of the resources that you might use. The next is the outputs. These are the activities, services, numbers, products, results, etc. The outputs are from what you are seeking to deliver. The details here should be purely factual and quantitative and must relate to the objective. So this is a training organisation that is taken from a bid to a local authority to support a particular training programme. 35 trainees complete a level 1 course, and they get 36 weeks of training undertaken with an average attendance of 18 young people on that particular course. So again, it's breaking it down into various categories. The outcomes on a project are very important. The outputs are the activities, whatever they are, and the outcomes are the qualitative and anticipated changes. I'll give you some examples of this. If it was an employment program, the outputs will be people getting skills or jobs, and the outcome would be that the community gets upskilled, or economic development activity is stimulated by people getting back into work and spending money in the local community, etc., etc. Here's some outcome related information as well. So on this training program, improve literacy skills amongst the target group in the target borough. So the English language skills are improved in the target group in the target location, wherever that is. Another example of that is increased English skills in 90% of refugee children completing the course. So that's the outcome within the target group or the target community, whatever it may be. Your outcomes should reflect your aims, and you should be able to monitor and measure them in some way. This is sometimes called evaluation or monitoring and evaluation, and you should evaluate the outcomes of the project and use the findings to improve services. So what would you be monitoring? In the case of this project, you would be monitoring the number of people on the program, what skills they've gained, what employment they've gained, has it had any other benefit in the community, were disadvantaged groups supported in any particular way, or their particular outcomes were improved in terms of skills. It could be a number of outcomes, but you've got to be able to monitor and evaluate those. There are systems for doing that. We're not covering them today because that will take quite some time to do that, because this is the general overview. And one of the things that I'm always asked, and many funders require this, is you might be asked to prove the need for your project. There's been a project in Bexley recently, some funding for businesses, and one of the things you're asked is, you know, why should we fund you? What's the need in the community for your project? So would you get information to back up your case? Because you have to make a case for this. How can you collate it, and what are the sources of this information? Here are some of them. A good place to start is local government, so national government. There's the website. If you're in Bexley, your local authority's address is bexley.gov.uk. You can do your own research and surveys. What you have to remember is that's subject to the Data Protection Act and GDPR, so you need to be registered with the Information Commissioner, which costs about £40. If you're holding any, whether you're a business or a non-profit or whatever, if you collect information on people, even if it's on paper and not on computer records, you still have to register with the Information Commissioner. You can also get information from the your local health organisation and the NHS. They collect a lot of statistical information about local communities, so they can target their health services. And the other major source of information is the Office for National Statistics, or the ONS for short, which is a government agency. And I would advise anybody who's looking for any kind of statistical information, that should definitely be one of your calling destinations, because they carry so much information. I get an email every day from them about something. You can register for updates and alerts, so that's a very, very good source of information. But all the ones that I've mentioned, you can do it yourself or through local, national or statistical agencies. There are other sources of information as well, depending on what you do and where you are. We're going to look at some of the aspects of submitting quality application now. Here's some key points to remember when submitting a funding application. The first is, do you need to register your interest? These days you do. It's probably through a local authority portal or a tender portal, something like that, but you will need to register your interests. The other thing that they often ask for these days, if you're especially if you're a business, is what's called a PQQ or an EOI. A PQQ is a pre-qualification questionnaire, and that asks you a number of questions about the infrastructure of your business and whether you've got relevant policy information, usually because any kind of organization, however large or small, has to have health and safety policies, GDPR, and other policies as well, depending on what you do. So they will ask for that information. An expression of interest is usually a very short initial application. They often use that to limit the number of applications, because remember, with that, not everybody gets through it. Bid writing is not an inclusive process. On the contrary, it's designed to exclude you, because often Bexley have just had a program called the Big Innovation Grant. They had 200 applications for it. They're not going to fund 200 organizations, I don't think. So these systems are designed to limit the number of organizations that can get funded, because it's, in this case and in many other cases, there's a limited funding pot of money to support it. So it's very important that you recognize these PQQs and ELIs and then complete them as with the guidance. You need to read the prospectus and guidelines carefully. You need to ensure you have suitable systems in place to enable you to complete the application. And another piece of advice, particularly if you're a small or newer business, apply for a budget you can cope with. Often, many statutory funders operate what they call procurement rules. The rule of thumb on this is they will not usually give grant funding, because remember, grants aren't repayable, to any organisation that has for more than 40% of its turnover. So if your turnover is £100,000 in a year, effectively, it's very unlikely that you're going to get much more than 40,000 for many funders, not all. And indeed, sometimes they have other requirements that Bexley Fund I was just telling you about. You had to have a minimum turnover of £50,000 to apply. So, you know, there are always factors designed to limit the number of applications. The next area that you should focus on is the clarity of the application. You need to explain how your project fits with the funder's priorities, whatever they are. That Bexley Big Innovation Grant, what you had to do is, that was all about innovation in business. So you had to describe how their funding would enable you to develop and innovate your business to make it more sustainable. And if you can match those two requirements with your application, you're in with a chance. You've got to answer all parts of each section clearly and quantify the outputs, whatever they are, whatever it is, whatever it is you're delivering. You can use bullet points, because these days many sections in applications have word limit numbers, so it could be 200, 300, 500. Usually 500 these days is the maximum amount of words on a particular section that you're allowed to complete your application with. So you can use bullet points, and obviously you've got to type it, because there's not many handwritten applications these days. Here's some tips on good practice. Read the whole form before you start. Fill in all the straightforward sections first, because you can get a bit overwhelmed with more complex applications. So at least if you've completed these more straightforward sections, you've got some of it done and you can focus on the more difficult ones. Ensure that all those involved with the delivery and monitoring of the project have a hand in writing it. If you're just a very small organization, that might not apply, but if different people are doing different things on your project or service, then everybody needs to be consulted. And if there are any senior managers involved, they need to have ownership of the project as well, so they need to be consulted about it. More good practice: share the first draft with a colleague. They may be able to spot some issues or typos, whatever. Test the clarity of the aims and objectives by presenting them to your colleagues. So describe the aims and objectives of your projects to them. And if it's coming across clearly, then you've done your job. If you've answered the questions fully, stop writing. You're not obliged to fill up each text box, although, as I just said, often these days it's word limited anyway, so you're not going to be able to get usually very long descriptive passages, so you've got to be concise. Here is an easy way to write a bid, which I call my 10 idea system. This is how to build up a funding application. So you take 10 ideas, and that equals 400 words, 20 sentences of 20 words each on average. So that's a bid in 20 sentences. Each idea should consist of 2 sentences of 20 words each. So how that works is quite straightforward. So your first sentence is a statement, whatever it is, and then the second sentence is the evidence to back it up from research, experience, signposting, etc., etc. And you can start with an initial bullet point and develop it into an idea. And then you've got your 2 sentences. Sentence 1 is a statement of 20 words, and then sentence 2 is the evidence for it. Here's an example. This is bullet point 1, provide childcare support alongside the training program. So the first sentence, which is a statement, we will provide creche and childcare support for students and their dependents that will run alongside the training courses. So that's 19 words. And sentence 2 is the evidence. This is internal evidence in this case, but it could be external evidence. Previous research shows that this help needs to be available both before and after training to ensure students' full commitment. So the first sentence is the statement, and the second sentence is the evidence to back it up. So that's pretty straightforward. And if you do that, you can build an application from 20 sentences, just doing it like that. Here's some of the other issues you have to consider now in applications, which are very important. The first is equalities and equal access to services. The second is the social impact of your project, you know, what impact it has in the community and on the people you're going to be providing this service. The next one is cross-cutting themes. That Bexley bid that I described recently, which is an innovation business bid. They were also asking about the project in relation to addressing climate change issues. So climate change these days and sustainability is a cross-cutting theme, as it's described in the jargon of bid writing. And there are other cross-cutting themes as well. That's one of them that's more popular these days. Other things you need to take into account is whether the bid writing process is very evenly matched. If you're competing against other people for funding or grants, added value is a big issue here. What are you offering through your project or your services that provide additional or added value either to the funder or to the people or organizations you're providing the service to. And the other thing we're going to look at is some common mistakes. So equality and diversity, very, very important these days. You need to think about how your project might affect, you know, different demographics in the community, young people from ethnic minorities, disabled people, or any disadvantaged groups. There are 7 strands of equality, which I've listed there: age, disability, race, gender, sexuality, transgender, religion, and belief. And under the Equalities Act, revised 2010, there are 9 so-called protected characteristics. And again, I've listed them there. Again, you need to think about what the project will do to promote diversity and equal opportunities, and what the project will do to ensure equality of opportunity. The other important thing is to think about equal access to services, and that's quite important. You know, for example, for disabled people, are they able to access your service in some way that is feasible for them, whatever it is? If it isn't, you could even be in breach of equalities legislation. So that's something you need to take very, very seriously. Here are a number of common mistakes in bid writing, and if you avoid these, that will improve your chances. I've already mentioned some of these early. Huge numbers of funding applications are ineligible, mostly due to not reading the guidance properly, because it could be an application that's only applicable to one geographical area, for example, and if you're from another geographical area, then it's going to be disqualified before it's even properly considered. There are many other examples of this, but you can get around them by reading the guidance properly. Applications take a lot of time and energy, so don't waste it through carelessness. This is some analysis that was done a few years ago on a program called Fast Forward Grants. There was over 500 applications for it. 203 applications out of 534 were ineligible in a previous round. Why? 137 were due to not providing the correct financial information, incomplete or missing annual accounts, no bank account details given. Other reasons included organizations not eligible for a range of reasons, asked for too much money. I mentioned this about the procurement rules. If your income in a year is £100,000 and you apply for £400,000, it's going to make it very difficult for you to be awarded that, especially from statutory bodies. So think about that 40% rule that I told you about earlier. Didn't state the project actions. So this is a common one. I've seen a lot of applications where the problem they want to address is described, and often described very, very eloquently. But the actions to address that issue or problem or service, whatever it is, are not either stated or stated properly. So that is a very, very significant reason why many applications fail. You've got to detail what you're going to provide the service or address whatever the issue is. And if you do that, that's really going to boost your chances. This was from some research done on the awards for all strand of the lottery. Again, 74%. This is, I think it's got better in recent years because this was a few years ago, but this was several years ago. And then 74% of applications were ineligible, which is a lot. What were the main problems? Missing information, bank account details, references, the constitutional status of the organization, because it was unclear, or the directors of the company weren't the same as what were detailed on the company's house website, because funders do check these details. And in the case of the lottery, you've got to provide as an identity check your date of birth. If you don't provide that, again, your application will just get thrown out in that particular case, although many other organizations don't ask you to provide that level of personal information. These are my 10 tips for writing a good funding bid. Please use these for reference. Remember, it takes time to build up these skills, but there are many sources of help to support your work out there. So here's my 10 top tips. It's essential that the funding criteria is carefully read before deciding whether to apply. So read the guidance, make sure you can apply, and then do it. Make sure you think through exactly how the project will be managed and how the work will progress. So that's your project delivery plan in essence. Number 3, make sure you are clear about the funding conditions and you're able to meet these. For example, like that Baxter grant I was telling you about, you have to deliver it within 6 months. So if you don't deliver it within 6 months, they may ask for the money back. They might not, but that's down to the funder's discretion. So those are the kind of things you have to look at, but maybe other terms and conditions as well. Other examples, number 4, funders are increasingly likely to ask what difference your service will make to people's lives. So that's the social impact of your product or service, whatever it is. Number 5, it is advisable to have a credible exit or succession strategy for the project. In other words, if you're funded for a year, what happens beyond that year? How's the project going to continue? Because if you can, even if it's only the bare bones of the strategy, that might help you, because a lot of funders are concerned that they fund you for a year or 2 years, whatever, but what happens beyond that period? You know, that's added value that I mentioned earlier. If you can acknowledge that in your application in however an outline form, that may well help you get funding, because it shows you thought about the long-term long-term impact of the project and how it might continue. Tip number 6, make sure you answer the question that the funder is actually asking, and answer all the questions clearly, correctly, and succinctly. You've got to answer the question, you've got to read it, and you've got to try and answer what they're asking for. You'd be surprised how many applications don't do that. Make sure you provide any evidence which can support your application. We mentioned that a bit earlier in terms of statistical information, or any of your own research or partner organizations' research that you can access, or research from other sources. It could be universities or think tanks, wherever, professional bodies, Federation of Small Businesses, whoever. Any data, community consultation, research or social impact evidence is very important. If you've done any research of your own about what you're delivering and can demonstrate that, many funders really like that, because you're not just relying on other people's information, although you may well have to provide some of that. If you've got your own and you can use it to back up your case, that is quite powerful. And then number 9 is probably the most important. The financial information budget you provide must be complete and correct. It must add up. It must be detailed in the way the funder requests. Sometimes they actually give you a balance sheet to complete, or a finance form to complete, and you need to ensure that the budget is worked out down to the detail and adds up and is correctly balanced, because that shows you can manage the finances of the project. If it doesn't add up, or there's anomalies in the budget, that will significantly prejudice your chances of success, because you have to manage and deliver that budget. Finally, make sure the application is signed by the relevant and appropriate person if required. And finally, remember, it's not necessarily the good idea which gets funding, it's the good application. It's as simple as that. I've come across many organizations who do really good work, but they really struggle to demonstrate it in funding applications, which is a real shame. So, you know, but that's what it's often judged on, the quality of the application. So the next steps, how do you take it forward? Start by working on short applications to build skills and confidence. You know, short applications for small amounts of money, then you're building up your track record. If your organization does not have a track record, it will be difficult at first. But if you write applications for smaller amounts of money, then that will be fine. Don't be a quitter, keep at it. Like I said, I mentioned the 5% rule earlier. Hopefully you'll have picked up some tips which will increase your chances of submitting a quality application. Another way to gain skills and experience is to try and work in partnership with other organisations whenever possible. If they're writing the bid, you will probably pick up some techniques on how to do that. And remember, one good bid could pay off. We've been working with an organisation recently. We had some problems getting it funded in the beginning. Last week, we got notification that we'd written a bid that had raised this organisation or supported this organisation to raise £100,000. You know, that's taken some time. They had some faith in us, but it has paid off. But that's taken a year to achieve that. And we are a professional bid writing organisation. So, you know, you've just got to keep at it, really, because you don't need a big success rate. One good bid could be very good for you. So this is a copy of our funding guide. We produced one ourselves. You can buy this off us if you want, which has all the details of how to write a bid. It costs £12. If you contact us, we will either send you a download of it or a printed copy, like you can see there. So I'm going to stop the share now, and thank you for listening to me. And there we go. I will happily take questions now from people, if anyone has got any. If you can raise your hands either on screen or on the hand, the electronic hand. I can't see. I've had a message from Timothy Holmes, which says, great information. Please send slides to this email address. What we're doing is we're sending a copy of the slides out after today. So you can expect to receive those very shortly. So I'll just give you a chance to ask any other questions. Thank you very much for bearing with me today. And this may well go on our YouTube channel in due course. So thank you for bearing with us. I'd like to thank you for tuning in today. Thank you very much. Bye.